So I thought I'd be done, but I am done on the real. But honestly, I wanted to do a little Christmas episode, and that has a lot to do with the fact I can't get my phone to get anybody y'all know. I want to figure out how they got it set up to where you just go this way, it rotates the image, and that's so that when you print out the picture, they'll flip it back reverse for you and you get the real. Um, but mine's all reading backwards, even when I save it, and it's still coming in backwards. So I gotta figure out how to do that before I can change the focus of this. But mostly, I mean, I've said this many times. I've been trying to get to talk about until the word until, and it's this really powerful argument because a lot of dispensationalists and futurists and other Hebrew Israelites, numbers of people will use the word until, and they say, well, look right here in Romans 11:25 or Luke 21:24 or Matthew 23:39. It says until, and they'll get really loud with it. Until. And then so that means that a whole host of other things come along with it. And I think they take it really too far because it's not even saying what they're saying. And Steve Gregg has been doing a lot with this. And I would encourage anybody listening to Steve Gregg talk about a few things. But, I don't have any problem with Hanukah, regardless of what anybody tells you. I think that that's well and good, like Haitian Independence Day. If you got some outside rulers that, don't really represent you and tax you and don't give you representation or whatever it is. I'm not here to judge. It was before my day to judge in the first. So I don't got any problem with Haitian Independence Day or Hanukkah, but I might say Merry Christmas, and then I didn't know that you were actually Happy Hanukkah, because people typically go with probabilities. I'm probably going to be speaking English and talking about the weather and things like that, so it's probably a safe bet. And but if you celebrate other things, Kwanzaa or whatever, that's fine. I don't have any problem with that at all. But what I wanted to do as my final video is talk about this word until. And these arguments never occur in Greece. They haven't occurred in all these other languages as people go through history. The King James Bible is pretty new. And, in the grand scheme of things, if the old Bible is like 400, this is like 1600, so it's a quarter was a 20% or whatever, 20% less. We'd only or like for 80% or 4/5, or if you look at another way, like a whole quarter, of the time from after happening to when they're writing about it 4 times, difference. Like, it's a huge difference. And English is only the place where this comes from, and they have like so many verses they talk about. These are like the kind of one-hit wonders. They have many verses. I'm not saying a lot of these people don't read the Bible, but they do focus on several verses. I named them in this video already when I listed a few verses. But a lot of these futurists rely so much on these verses and think it's just like a slam dunk. And that's not the way to read the Bible. I'd almost think people are better off droning on, reading it at length, at tedium, just like all the verses. But that's not really do what they do. Like the Catholic Church, for instance, their liturgy, they might have like several hundred, Old Testament passages that they read from in the liturgical season. And this is going to reset every year, and you can thank them for the year in general. I mean, they got this all worked out, what happens on certain dates and certain seasons and stuff like that to go along. Christmas is when the sun goes away, and you know Resurrection Sunday when they're equal. Where the sun's more than the light, the darkness, and you know but I mean, like my subsidized JPS, they have in there like, oh, you have during this week we'll read this passage here, and then on another book there's like this week, they put the footnotes in the JPS version I have, and so I wanted to talk about the word until, because they'll take it and run with it and have a field day. They say the Bible means something it never says, and no better way to start, because this has to be this has to be it. Like, I mean, I don't have I don't think I'll be welcome in the Christian community anymore, because I wanted to in this video and dealing with Zechariah, because they'll take Zechariah 12 and take a couple verses out of context, and Daniel too, and they don't even realize these are Second Temple writings about the future war that was culminating in their aspirations for. And this is what Hanukkah is about, and more power to you and everything. But things did change after that. Like, there was like kind of a Hebrew roots revival, but then it kind of like pittered out, and then it kind of resurfaced again, mostly in Germany and Russia, Netherlands and stuff, and it's pretty separate. It's, like the things, challah bread and matzah meal and things like, you're not going to find this in the Bible, but I mean, it's fine. It's like something that happened. So when they say Jewish, often they can just mean like a kind of rye bread that, of course, isn't mentioned in the Bible, but um, it's very much a Hebrew revivalism that's come in the last 1,000 years, and when it comes to most of the people like to blame for this, I mean, Adam Green has a point. Like, the church is really the one to blame for this, because as the church tried to make things of being in communion or out of communion and this and that, they ended up excommunicating a lot of people and making boundaries and borders and divisions, and like Jesus said, coming to bring the sword. And this is in a lot of ways where Islam comes from. That Muhammad said, like, oh, I don't know if he said this, but allegedly, like, that the Christians had attacked the Kaaba that Abraham built. And so you can definitely see that Christianity had some influence in the formation there. And of course, Muhammad, like in the Quran, recited that about Christians, about Jesus, and about Mary, and things like that. So I don't put it past them. But as far as like Adam Green's theory, that's the most annoying thing about Adam Green is like I don't agree with his theory. I think it's more likely that the Romans wrote it, or Latin people, Greek people um, wrote it wrote it to influence Jewish people. Then I do believe that it was Jewish people wrote it to influence Greek people. And yes, I know that, of course, people like Paul, especially, and like maybe Peter and others, were Jewish people trying to influence the nations, of course. But I don't know. It's like, I mean, he doesn't even believe they're real people, but he's going to use that as one of his best arguments for one. But if I believe they're real people and I want to defend them, I mean, wasn't Josephus a person who was Jewish who worked for the Romans, like, and then of course even after Peter, and of course like I've said before that the authorship of Peter is lacking a little credibility in my opinion. I mean, but like Pastor Mike and everybody will tell you, if somebody says this, I'm the author, and they're not the author, so I can't really just keep on dividing with people. They'll continue to divide with me, though. I think ultimately, so it's hard to even go to church or anything anymore. But when it comes to that theory by Adam Green, I don't think that I would agree, because I would think that Paul, was seeing this happening, but not in the way that Adam Green does, and some like ultimately this is going to unfold the way that these Christians are going to do, because these Christians aren't interpreting it right. And yes, they are responsible for how it's being interpreted by those that are duping the Christians. So yes, Christianity is responsible, but I'm being responsible enough to speak as a Christian to say that's not what the Bible says. And I think that truth ultimately prevail. And that's one of the most things I was going to say about Adam Green is, when he gets a guest on, he'll have, like if I say my theory that the Romans created, he'll have on Joseph Atwell. But the way that he runs his show is, tire the old man out, like in the basketball game, to where, yeah, you're dunking and stuff, but because you had him running around the whole game, but really, I mean, I think it's more like this. I think it's more like, yeah, he wants confirmation bias, and he'll just keep on pressing his points to where you're just ultimately tired, to where you might confirm that he's right, because he paints in a way that's believable. But I mean, it's not really Jane. He doesn't have Joseph Atwell's position, and if Joseph Atwell confirmed his position, I don't think that's because he felt that. I don't think he knew Adam Green's position. He probably just agreed to whatever Adam Green was saying, that his audience, recognized as being his talking point. But he painted in such a way that sure, Adam, yeah, but it's I don't know why it has to be such a pet theory of his, because like my pet theory, that the Romans created it, I would say I hold to my vest. I don't think it's very tasteful, and it shows in the fact that a lot of people have thought this before, and not many have said about it. Nothing to speak about Mr. Atlow. He's a very tasteful person. Sure, I mean a little sacrilegious book cover, maybe I don't know, maybe ultra religious, and is just with the themes, the one and their sensibilities and offensive. They get offended, or to be defensive, or that they might have a problem with these kind of Salman Rushdie types that kind of push the borders of the culture and get a little backlash, and and this is how these people are lionized in the atheist community. But I wanted to talk about what Paul was saying, and honestly, what Paul was saying had a lot to do with him being a leader of a bunch of churches and being a very influential public figurehead that was very influential. I mean, the most influential person of history. I mean, some people say Muhammad, or Jesus, but I don't think it's fair to say Jesus because even though he didn't try, he's still God. So you kind of put, like a lot of people don't even call Jesus a prophet. He's like not even, it's on a different category and stuff like that. I mean, I wouldn't really agree with that, but that, you know what I'm saying? Like, I'll agree with things and disagree with them both, and that's how most things are in the Bible, because whatever solid idea exists in the Bible, the exact opposite exists too. So people can go on until they blue in the face about free will and predestination, and they're both in the Old Testament. And I think there's even a little influence in the New Testament too. But honestly, I think that people don't want to address the elephant in the room because of the history and marginalized minorities and things like that. That people don't want to really talk about the fact that. I can't remember what I said. But what was Paul saying? Well, so he was definitely a very influential guy, and so he said Romans 11, 25. He says, "For I do not desire, brethren, that you should be ignorant of this mystery, lest you be wise in your own opinion. That blindness in part has happened to Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in. For I do not desire, brethren, that you should be ignorant of this mystery, lest you be wise in your own opinion. That blindness in part has happened to Israel until the fullness of Gentiles has come in." So they see it as this kind of like impenetrable force field, that there's just going to be like this preserved race that's just continued and kept with a hedge of protection and pure racially for some ultimate, eschatological showdown or something like. And they have all these connotations, but I just want to say that that doesn't mean that at all. That's not what it's saying. So he's saying in verse 13 that he's speaking to the Gentiles, of course. He says, "I am apostle to the Gentiles, I magnify my ministry." Then he says, "If by any means I provoke to jealousy some of those that are in my flesh, and save some of them." So he's not saying it's impossible. He's saying, like, when he's honest, has happened in part to Israel, he's saying, I'm Israel. It's happened. I've been saved. I wasn't the first Christian. So the fact that there's Christians and Jesus is dead does not mean that no Israel will be saved. I mean, we see it happen all the time. So that's not a thing. It helps them explain some things in their heads with their futurism, but it's not a biblical idea. And he says, so he talks about for some of them being cast away is for them being castaways to reconcile the world. So in the process, like you got to understand Ephraim or Isaiah 11:13, and that's talking about how Israel will no longer have wrath against Judah, and Judah will no longer envy Israel. And so this is because Israel represents the church and Judah represents the Jewish people, and that they have a certain, like, oh, the prodigal son, this other, the older brother always did was told you he's jealous. So really, this goes way back. Like the Samaritans, like are even been there longer than Israel or Judah has even been there, but they've been like fighting for all these like many centuries, and ultimately, Israel gets like becomes like synonymous with the Gentiles, not when it comes to their identity. The Gentiles aren't Israel, but it's like this kind of osmosis. It's like they're mixed in, and we don't know who is whom. And some will say like, well, God does. But that's the thing, is like if they're mixed in, then it's not the same people, because you're going to have it where this woman had this child and this child and this had his daughter and had daughter and daughter, and this guy had a son and son and son and son, and you're going to have to make these decisions that how do you count them, and or God has his rules, and it gets to the point where it's ridiculous, because it's like, one, that doesn't make any sense, and two, so that's what God cares about. Like he's the whole time he's just like, I mean, yeah, it's like some great love story, but it's not a biblical love story, because they say like, oh, you can't, oh, you can't have anybody sleep with your woman because then you're not a man. You're pretty much dead. And then it's like, but other people are sleeping with God's woman. And he's like, cool, But God's doing things just, he wills them, and just they just happen, and he doesn't care what you want. And that's a problem with Calvinism and all these futurisms. They always just rely on a few verses that they think prove what they want. And yeah, it's like I said, the they might use a little Old Testament. So like the Catholic Church might have 400 verses or passages from the Old Testament. Some of these Calvinists, they might be like, I'm very biblical because I use the Old Testament. So I'm not like these other churches, but they really do just like the other churches. They just are getting out of the Old Testament or out of the New Testament and getting into the Old. And that's the thing, is like the Old is very hard to understand because the New is written to defeat the Old and not to do away with it, but to fulfill it, because they can say, well, we're not going to want you to live around us, and we're going to want to be separate from you, and we're going to want to not obey your rules and have our rules, because we were promised this and this, this and this and this. Well, okay, fine, we'll give you this, this, and this. And then it's just like, no, well, we don't want it. And it's like, well, you're really basically saying you just don't want Gentiles around you. You don't want them in where you live. And maybe if you lived in a place that was like the crossroads of all places, maybe that's the attitude you take. But I don't even think Jerusalem was that. I think that was out of the beaten path. But who really makes that journey that often? I mean, especially now that the canal is built there, I don't think anybody would be trying to cross there. But I mean, whatever the culture is, this is what this they're talking about. The time of Gentiles is like, it's kind of like exposure therapy. It's like, I don't think that many Latin people really were living there. So do they say, well, they're a minority? Well, it's like, well, it's more like taxation without representation. It's more like they weren't even given citizenship. You know, like how Paul was given citizenship, but like the Judean populace was not given citizenship. And I don't think Latin people would be there. You're saying like, well, John on the cross was written in Aramaic, Greek, and Latin, but it's just like, well, that's the languages they spoke, were Greek and Aramaic. And you might ask me, well, why Latin? And I was like, well, the police need to be able to read it too, know who is whom and what's going on. So they were under military occupation. That's what I'm saying. The police, the military police. But so there were Latin people there, but this wasn't the time of Gentiles. Like I said, this comes from Rome. So according to Rome, they felt like by not giving them citizenship, they were giving them total freedom, and that these were like the freest of all their provinces and everything. So I don't know what they're really complaining about, and we don't even try to colonize over there. And but I think by the time Cornelius was there and stuff, like, you're going to start seeing some kind of colonization, and you're going to see legions of troops, and they had seen legions before too. And so a lot of when the Bible was supposed to end, when you do the countdowns and stuff, was like in the Greek era. And a lot of these people that are really big Christians, they'll be like, "Oh, it's supposed to end in the Roman era," and they can try to prove it. Meanwhile, they're quoting things that could have been influenced by like Origin and things like that. So, I mean, you can't really make that claim. I mean, it seems to me clear that because you guys don't have Maccabees and things in your Bibles, so it's hard to see the parallels between Maccabees and Daniel and stuff like that for you guys. And so what is Paul talking about? In a way, it's kind of he's saying it is kind of true that it is kind of a zero sum game, but it's kind of like a zero sum game from the perspective of Israel, because it's like Rome thought, let's have this Messiah that's going to give them everything they want, and the dispensations will say there was like this kind of secret mission and nobody got anything, and it was only offered, and then no, the kingdom was inaugurated, started, commenced, everything. Like, so I'm not having that at all. But when it comes to when people say, "Oh, John, it's like, oh, it doesn't seem like a kingdom. Just look outside." And it's like, well, that's the challenge. That's what we're put on earth for, is this choice of doing right and doing wrong. And it's not like that's what justifies you. No, we're automatically justified, but we are put here to make choices of will we follow God or not. Will we ultimately have a good conscience or not? Like, uh, what's the point of doing anything if it's already determined in the first place? So it's kind of like this watching, seeing what's happens next. And what happens next was that the temple was destroyed. And so, like, when you read the Old Testament, it's like, oh, when something gets destroyed, it's this, baby eating, starvation, like, uh, pillage, and you can even see this in Zechariah. So yes, it did it did get prophesied, brother against brother and stuff. But they apply it to like the third temple. They just think like, and it's just like, we'll not even talk about the Book of Judith, because the Book of Judith is what it's really all about. Because like, what was popular is Greek culture, and it's all about Alexander and Alexander romance. Like, so he's just young, full of life, and he just races across to the end of the world, and it only hints at it in the Bible. Like Daniel talks about the goat that came out, and crashed down, and knocked over the two-horned ram. But it's obviously Daniel. But the legends of Daniel are like that of Muhammad. They'll say, "Oh, this woman poisoned him or something." And so this is actually the story of Jael. Is this Judges is writing after the time of Alexander, but they're inserting these stories to, oh, this woman's on top of a mirror, and she drops a millstone and it knocks a guy on the head. Like that could have happened to anybody. It didn't happen to a bad person or anything. But the Bible is written in a way that it's like there's good and bad, and good is so identifiable that it's just like, oh, God promised these identifiable people his bride. But the New Testament tells you there was like this banquet, and he invited all these people, and everyone was too busy to come. And so when Jesus came, he said, "This is the Messianic age. Look here in Isaiah 61. This is me." And John was like, "Is it really you?" And he's like, "Yes, it's me." And so when it comes to the blind and everybody healing, it's, yes, this is absolutely the Messianic age, but they had ears of corn and heads of lettuce, that they were given this sight, but they chose to be blind, so the Lord had made them blind. And it's just the resolved facts of it, and time has only proven to be true. There may be, I'd say probably not, but there may be, I invite the possibility that there's a line of at least one person that had been following the same religion for the 2,000 years. I think it's probably much more likely that most are, and if not every one of them, were from some religious experience in life that has become cultural by now, but probably started even political, for all I know. But that's how the Old Testament's written. It's all encompassing. And so with Christianity popularizing the Old Testament, it's just invited this kind of like, oh, who's your daddy? Who's your master? Who's your teacher? Who's your leader? And a lot of people are making bank being a Hebrew roots teacher, but I mean, I study Semitic languages. They're interesting, but I mean, isn't it hard to write? Like when you write from right to left, like it's kind of like a typewriter. You write like an old typewriter, you can't even see what you're writing because the typewriter bars are in the way of the line you're writing on. So when you're trying to write creatively, it's kind of hard because like you can't even see what you're writing. And so if you're writing from right to left, most people are right-handed. I don't know if everybody got their left eye, poked out, maybe they'd be if everyone got their right eye poked out, maybe they'd be left-handed, but for whatever reason, people are mostly right-handed. So it just kind of makes more sense to write the other way. I mean, maybe they didn't think of that at first, and that's what I see the Bible is like. It's like all of our history. So that's how Paul talks to his congregation. It's like like I said, Israel represents the nation. So when 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 the nations, like, yeah, like, oh, maybe I'm contradicting myself when I say they had the law, but they had a law. I mean, they were a law unto themselves, and I don't even know what the original law was because it's been so many times overwritten and reworked and over the centuries. But there seems to have been some priestly group of people that almost were like a nation that came out of Egypt and ruled Egypt and settled in Canaan and ruled the whole religious establishment and cultic praxis of sacrifice and things like this. And they had specialized knives and big old turbans. And I mean, the facts are just there. Oh, a Persian people or Iranian or something. And when it comes to the Jewish people from like Second Temple, that has came out of Babylon. That was a group of folks that came out of Babylon, and they weren't willing to work with the Samaritans. And this is the group that Jesus came out of. So yes, Jesus was Jewish. If that confirms Adam's point, Jesus was Jewish as a person. Like, he was born under the law, and he came to his own. This is Bible, and but so that's, like I said, that's what Adam Green says. But I don't think that's what Jesus' point was, because Jesus' point was so the Jewish person realizes the greatness of Alexander. Because what we don't see today is that in the Greek mind, people came from gods that were children of God. So someone like Alexander especially came from God. And Dionysus came from the east. And this is where, like, Prometheus came from. And Prometheus gives people the knowledge. So, like, this is what the Bible writers are coming from, is like this ancient this ancient knowledge of all people. This is the primitive knowledge. And Jesus was saying that the people around him were coming like the older brother. Oh, I know everything. I'm not trying to hear everything. I'm gonna teach you. Jesus said, "Let the children come to me." So he was saying to them, "You must be born again. You must come as a child." But that's not how Paul's teaching us to understand the Scripture. Paul's saying, be a grown up. We don't need milk. Milk's for babies. So that's how I see all hitherto society. The Bible is our history. That it wasn't their history. I mean, like, even when Israel wrote it, it was talking about people that were way before Israel. And when Judah took over, he was talking about Israel. And when the church took over, he was talking about Judah. And it's going to go on like this. And when the new prophets come, Joseph Smith and the rest, they say, "Oh yeah, there's Jesus," and I'm Joseph Smith. I talk about Jesus, and so it just goes on like that. But it's part of our whole history as a humanity, and didn't need to happen to any one of us in our lineage. You're missing the point. You're totally missing the point. Like, honestly, it gets under my nerves, this kind of racist, singling out and exclusivity, and especially the Kabbalah, like, oh, a separate kind of innateness that I can't. It's so detestable. And And I'm not talking about all of it. I'm just talking about the racist parts. And so all his humanity, we had a way of coming to know things. We thought there was 13 months, and we thought there was 12, and we thought the best thing to do was to cut an animal's throat. Then we thought the best thing to do was shoot it. And humanity goes through all these different things as a whole. So Paul is using the growth of the person to describe what's happening to humanity at his time. He's not talking to me, he's talking to that time period, just as Jesus was. Jesus was talking to the Jewish people at his time. He'd have these big audiences, and then he wouldn't even speak in areas where people hated him. But he was never speaking against the law or anything, but they still accused him of it. And when I'm getting low on time. I'm gonna get back to the Bible part of it, but I hope that was clear that as humanity grows up, they don't need the milk and the schoolmaster, So the law had its point in time. There's no reason to continue it. And that's the point of the New Testament. And so it says, and if you want me to make more videos after this, you don't need to sponsor me. Just say, what do you mean this is the message of the New Testament? I will show you, I promise. But I'm pretty much done. I don't want to. If people don't want to care like about what this all means and what it was written for and why it's have such a important part in the culture, and because it had such an important part in the culture, it's backfired to where its own opposition was created. But they should have known to begin with by creating a book that was going to be so divisive or divisive, and they did that because they knew that ultimately Jerusalem wasn't going to be able to keep its independence as it had been. And that became increasingly clear through the generation, just as Pompey had eventually went in there. I think it was Titus or somebody that, eventually pulled the plug, and it was never the same after that. It was the abomination of desolation, and people ran to the rooftops so there's nowhere to run, and all the things, that Jesus prophesied happened for that, like rocks fall on us. And remember all the lamentations and woes in Luke, Jesus giving all those people that were laughing and being scourged and things like that. That's what that's all about. So when you open up Luke at the beginning, it's like, oh, here's Simeon. This guy's gonna be, and John knows that this guy's gonna be wonderful. And then as soon as he's born, this Jewish guy picks him up. He's like, this baby's gonna save the world. And Mary's like, the world's already saved. And it's just like, you just don't get it. Like, maybe don't read it or something. Like, but you think this is some sort of like haphazard, like, you want it? No? Okay, peace. I'll come back in 2,000 years and I'll reform you in the land. Then we'll do it over again or something. It's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. I can't believe this is, but there's nowhere to blame, like Adam Green says, but the church. I mean, the church has created this monster, but it's really bad. And so when I was reading like Zechariah, I just decided to start at 9. I kind of divide Zechariah up into a few parts, and because when you go through Zechariah, the beginning is kind of like talking about the people right then and there, and then it starts to come into the eventual history of the Second Temple. So it starts from like present, and then it just jumps into future. But I don't even think it was prophetic, because I think Zechariah was not actually around when the New Testament was written. Like when Jesus quotes Zechariah, he never uses his name. So there was probably talk of maybe some Zechariah. And when we finally get the book, it ends up not confirming this or that, or you know what I mean. So like the false prophet has every bit as role as the new prophet, and so I'm not going to get into Zechariah. It's a very questionable book, especially when I decided, because I break it into several parts. I was like, where's a good place to kind of talk about 12? I was thinking like maybe 9 is where, I've read Zechariah a few times, and parts of it lots of times. So like, yeah, maybe let's start at 9. Then I'll prove my point. And I had done this the other day, and I was like, they want to take over like Lebanon and Hamas, and like really just stretch out the boundaries to the points of the earliest days of Joshua. And it's like, whew, that's not going to go good well. Like, it's like Israel be a flame and just torch Jordan. And, it's like, I have friends that are Jordanian, bro. And it's just like, and then it's like Zechariah 9:5. It's like, and Gaza will be obliterated. I'm just like, this is not aging well. Like, and the people that say it is, it's like, what? If I don't steal your house, so who's gonna steal your house? Someone else gonna steal your house. I'll steal your house. Come on, go get around it. So I'm not going to even go in the Old Testament for this video. I think the Old Testament didn't have this message I'm giving you, but this message I'm giving you is the veiled message of the New Testament that's all about the Old Testament. So it's important, but not in the Bible. So it says, I do not want you to be. So what is this mystery? So in Romans 11, it says, and if some of the branches were broken off, and you, being a wild olive tree, were grafted in among them, with them became a partaker of the root and the fatness of the olive tree. So with the part that hasn't been broken off, we can be with that, the good part of Israel, and even maybe even the patriarchs, like maybe not the patriarchs, but like maybe the righteous from Abel to Zechariah or something. I don't know, whatever it is. Do not, but it says, do not boast. This 18 is a very hard one to understand. I'm not avoiding it because I think it supports their case. Quite the opposite. I think it's all about Jesus, but I want to focus on 19. You will say, then branches were broken off that I might be grafted in. So this wasn't God's goal. Like, much like he's about to say, did they stumble? Did they fall? Like, no, God didn't mean this. Did God break his promise? No, God didn't break his promise. They broke the promise. He came to his own. They would not receive him. It's all about predestination. I'm not predestination. Excuse me. It's all about choice. They chose not to believe in him, the Messiah, when he came. And it says, I'm not saying that has anything to do with people today. It's for that generation. That generation. That generation. That was very clear in the Bible, and it always has been. It's only these futurists that ignore that. So I'm not saying people's father sins have anything to do with their own sins at all. So I say, uh, but so he's saying because of unbelief they're broken off, and you stand by faith. So when Paul's writing to the Gentiles, he's like, I marvel in you, you who believed me. I'm not Jesus, and you had faith in me. That's amazing. Like, wow. I would have never done that. And then so he says, for if he did not spare natural branches, he will not spare either. This has no meaning that, okay, one day you're going to be kicked out. No, he's saying if you choose to be haughty and just be like, I got the promise, ha ha ha, and just like doing bad, you're going to lose it too. And he's not talking about a race of people. He's not talking about there's the race of Jews and there's the race of Gentiles. No, he's saying any person. And that's the biggest mistake they make. The biggest mistake they make, and that's going to be the last verse we deal with, is they believe that this is talking about a lineage of people that just goes on and on and on. And there's some evidence in Matthew 23 that might make you think that, but that's not what he's saying. So that's the biggest mistake. So get that out of your head completely. It has nothing to do with like a race of people. So even when he starts off, like this whole section, you know, they're saved for the Father's sake. He's not talking about a race of people, saying each one of them can freely come. He loves those people, not that people. There's his beloved people. You got to stop thinking like that. Any one of those is a very loved person who's welcome to come at any point. They're not made blind by God until one day they believe. No, they believe all the time. It happens all the time. And that's one of the things that Paul's words are hard to understand, because he'll say, oh, nobody can say that Jesus is Lord unless they speak by the Spirit of God. It's like, no, any jerk can say Jesus is Lord. You know what I mean? But it's probably something that's lost in translation. And that's my argument here, is that y'all are lost in translation. Y'all have taken a translated version and made a whole doctrine on it that trumps all other doctrines, that just like that all you're worried about is getting raptured out of the sky or some crazy nonsense. And but yeah, I mean, sure, does he think that Jewish people are going to be less likely to join this thing as the more and more Gentiles joined by the droves? Sure, I think that's probably he thought that, and he's going to think like, so be it. What he's saying is, so be it. He's saying if a bunch of Jewish people hate my ministry and either want to copy me so they can get rich and famous like I could be, or they want to call me a spy, or they want to get you under the law, or they want to ignore you, or they want to say we'll rise up against them, or whatever it is, so be it. Paul's saying, I used to be Jewish. So people like Michael Brown say he's still Jewish. He's like, yeah, I know. He's still got those weird things that, oh, this is unclean, and this is this has to be done for this ritual purpose, and like, he's not going to get over that stuff overnight. I don't know why Michael Brown doesn't, because he's supposedly converted when he's 16 years old, and now he's like 82, so I don't know why he's not over that kind of stuff. But sure, I mean, Paul probably thought like, oh, the end of days and the resurrection and all these stuff he grew up hearing about. He's gonna talk about the stuff in the third heaven, and I mean, you see the same stuff in other Semitic cultures. I mean, and even Greek cultures at the time. But that doesn't mean Paul like people when they hear inspired, they think, oh, this person can tell the future, and they got talk to God like Moses did, sit up there. I'm not saying Moses even sat up there. Like nobody really talks to God. Like it's crazy. So anybody that's got all these experiences and God talks to them, and I don't know, y'all can have all them. And it says, so blindness has happened in part to Israel. So only some of them. And yeah, he's going to say what he's saying. So you might say, well, Josh, this doesn't mean until. Why did he say until? Well, that's because that's what until means in ancient language. That as long as, up into the point of, don't be thinking that we got to get ours first before you get to. No, we're going to go all the way to the end. So it's like saying, oh, God's gonna stop what he's doing and be like, oh, Israel, can I escort you in? Get away, Gentiles, get away, Gentiles. No, there's gonna be as many Gentiles as you want. That's how these things work. Exposure. It's like, oh, I don't want to sweat. Well, think about sweating even more. You like that's if you're gonna be afraid of it, and you gotta get exposed to it. That it's like, oh, heaven forbid a Gentile get in. It's like, no, all the Gentiles are getting in. Don't you think that, oh, I'll just wait till Gentiles don't think it's cool, then I'll get joined. No, we're going to have all the Gentiles and they're going to keep coming in. And what are you going to do about it? Nothing. That's what it means. That's what until means. You don't, like Steve Gregg says, you don't come out of your room until you apologize. Like, I mean, in that case, yeah, like that's the deadline, but and then things change. But like in this case, it's not even talking about a deadline and things changing. It's saying don't expect this other thing to happen first, because it's not going to happen first. God's not going to make sure Gentiles can't come in so you can feel like, oh, can this be our religion? No, Gentiles are going to keep in because it's a messianic age. Let it rip. And so but the fact that Luke, a different author, uses similar language times the Gentiles, people will automatically think that there's these are connected terms, and though they're the same language, I don't know if that's I don't think they're the same. I have a completely different interpretation of Luke. That I mean, yeah, they're similar. There's still going to be the exposure. There's still going to be like this animosity. This, oh, all these Gentiles are using our religion, but this was a concession. This was love. This was saying, look. You don't want to live with us. We don't want to live with you. You I mean, we like you and all, but nobody wants more people, and so we realize you don't like our customs. So how about this? We'll give up all our things that make you think we're gross. Prove that the things that you always really hated us for, that are ingrained into our culture, are actually part of you too, and we'll give up all the polytheism. That's your biggest thing, is don't worship other gods. So, and we'll keep your week. That's on lockdown. 12 months. Boom. I don't know. Like whatever it is, we'll do it. We'll keep on the this culture, and we'll keep this word going, and we'll get rid of that word, and we'll do it. But you guys gotta like stop saying, we need to kill this woman because she was unfaithful to her husband and stuff like that. Like chill. That looks really bad when you stone that woman because her and her brother, uh, her husband's cheating on her and he wants to move this new bride in. So him and his brother said, "Oh, we saw her sleeping with the younger brother," and the younger brother says, "Uh, Refuge City." I don't know. I don't know how it went. I wasn't there. They did have that sinful woman brought to Jesus Christ in the book of John. They're like, "Oh, what are we gonna do with her?" Knowing full well that he'd get them in big trouble with the Romans if he was just like, "Let's do that like, Torah stuff, bro." Oh, I'm feeling some Torah fervor. Yeah, the Torah energies. La 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 la. Then all of a sudden, some kid in the back like throws a stone, and then I'll just lets loose. And they will fall by the edge of the sword and led away captive into the nations. And Jerusalem will be trampled by the Gentiles until the Gentiles are fulfilled. One, this doesn't say anything to do with like, oh, and these people that were taken to the nations, then they're going to come back. No, them being taken into the nations has to do with taking a serious blow, maybe even a fatal blow. It means like you're not going to even be here anymore. It's not talking about eschatology though. When it talks about until the times of Gentiles are filled, I don't think this has anything to do with Christianity or anything like that. I think this has to do with them not being many Romans up in there. It's like, oh, these people basically police themselves. They know to fear us, but sometimes they do get some teachers that teach not to fear us, and then they can act up. And so we got to put down the kibosh once in a while, but most of the time it's pretty easy. And then it just gets worse and worse and worse, and all these zealots and Sikaris, and it's just like, okay, surround the city, flee to the mountains, the days of vengeance, 70 AD, fall by the edge of sword, chapter, bam, there's no more Jerusalem. This means the end of Jerusalem, and this is actually what those very obscure passages at the end of Zechariah and Daniel and everything talk about is this is Second Temple. And so it's all being fulfilled. Everything that hadn't been fulfilled from the first regathering, the very few Second Temple books, I mean, it's like happening right here. And even Joel. But what Joel will say, oh, this will happen in the future because we need to have our sunrise day, the new dawn, where we get to rule you and send you into child trafficking and things like that. But and then you'd say, oh, and Peter said it was fulfilled a long time ago. I thought you're preterist. Well, I'm saying this is just like constantly fulfilled with Jesus' message that this is the redemption. This is punishment to some and salvation to others. So even though it's not literally being fulfilled because it's kind of reversed, it's being fulfilled because those that weren't with God were those that rejected the Son, is what it boiled down to. And that's the message of the New Testament, is that those that were punished in 70 AD were those that didn't choose his Son, that didn't choose the Messiah, that rejected God. And so they could be saved by getting over all of these, oh, I can't eat around you. If you come to our market, you're going to make the whole market polluted, and these kind of things that were put in place to keep them apart, which would ultimately mean the death of the law, the death of the culture, and everything, and the religion too, which is unfortunate because The whole point was to save all this for the day of the Messiah. And then if you don't think the Messiah came, that's very unfortunate. But if you think the Messiah has come, then it all works out. And so that's why I'm lucky. I'm lucky to believe that it's all written, that God's will eventually is going to be done or has been done as good as they knew it could. And the result of history is, as Paul says in Romans 6, I think it's Romans 13, this is what the authorities put in place, and it's good enough. Whatever happened, probably the better man went out. Not that the Romans are better than the Hebrews, but that maybe they're having a bigger empire is better than a smaller empire, or because of the you get taken over by enemies less often, or maybe the writing style was better, or maybe they had better military strategies, or something silly like that. So it is, what I'm trying to say is, it is what it is, and that's how the Bible took the Babylonian invasion. Oh yeah, it is what it is. It was prophesied, and then Jesus prophesied the things would happen to Jerusalem. But it's like, oh well, this wasn't how it's supposed to be. Let's rewind it and do it over again, and let's do a redo. And it's like, no, that's not what the Bible's teaching. If you take the Bible as a whole, that's not what the Bible's teaching. And lastly, Matthew 23:39. You understand what Jesus was up against. When he would talk, people would be like, oh, this guy is the devil who casts out devils with the power of the devil. He's the carpenter's son. He's a Samaritan. He's the devil that casts out demons with the help of the devil. And so he didn't. They weren't really coming up to him with a holy kiss that often. I know there's a time in John 5 or 6 or whatever where they wanted to make him ruler, but a lot of times it wasn't always like that. Okay, so I think that Matthew 23:39 is a good use of until. This is one that they use a lot, but I do think this is what until means, like how we use it in English. These other ones, I think it means like, don't think it will happen first. Like, so when it comes to the Father, they'll be trampled in front of their foot until the times of the Gentiles is fulfilled. That means that you're not going to get your kingdom back. You're all going to be scattered. Do your swords. The Gentiles are going to do whatever they're going to do. You're not going to stop them. It's going to go as long as the Gentiles are going to go. So similar as 11:25, it's going to go as long as. That's what until means. It doesn't have all these contexts of until. It doesn't mean that. It just means as long as. But they will freak out about this and have it mean everything that they hope it means, and write all this kind of nonsense into it. And it says, notice again, this only happens in English countries, and only in the recent years. But we've been a Bible people for thousands of years. So how does that happen? So it says, this one I think is a good use of Matthew 23:39. Is a good use of until. It means what we think it means until in English. And it says, until you, literally you, welcome me as Messiah, you're not going to see me. Literally. Look, I am. People think it means, because when you read up to it, it's talking about like it's like, woe to you, scribes and hypocrites, because you build up the tombs of prophets and adorn monuments of the righteous, and say, if we lived in the days of our fathers, we would not have been partakers of the blood of the prophets. So listen, he's quoting them. He's quoting them. Therefore, you are witnesses. Therefore, you are witnesses. This is. Have you ever been in a court case or anything? This is how you make a good case. Is when you use their words against them. Their words against them. Does that make any sense to you? This is their words. I don't have to believe in them. I can stipulate them to make my point. So it says, therefore you are witnesses against yourselves that you are the sons of those who murder the prophets. Fill up then the measure of your father's guilt. So people think, well, fill up then. So that means that there was Jacob's guilt, then there was Joseph's, and then there was Ephraim's, and you can just build it up like that. No, that's not what he's saying. He's saying, oh, you believe you're a lineage of people that has all these sins on them, and I mean, you sooner see God by sinning than by doing right at this point. No, I'm just joking. But then he says, what does he mean, fill up the measure of your father's guilt? I think he's saying, like, by the measure you meet others, you'll be met. And that if you want to live and die by Moses, then that's how you're going to live. And so I think it's more just an argument, like, in their kind of like something that would make sense to them. You know, I'm not sure about 32, but 33 says, serpents and brood of vipers, how can you escape the condemnation of hell? He's not talking about a race of people. He's talking about those around him. And those around him are, in fact, representing that generation of Jewish people. But generation doesn't mean, like, race. It never meant that. It never meant ethnicity. It never meant generation means generation. It means, oh, me and my brothers and sisters are a generation. And there's Generation X. Then there's what comes after Generation X? Generation Y. Then there's Generation Z. And so that's what a generation means. It doesn't mean what they're trying to make it mean. So serpents, brood of vipers. So what are they trying to say? That these people are like a race of vipers? The serpent seed doctrine? Jesus is saying that? No, Jesus isn't calling the Jewish race. I don't even believe there is a Jewish race, but if you do, then he's not calling the Jewish race the serpent seed. I don't know why you'd say that. So it says, therefore, indeed, I send you prophets, wise men, scribes. Some of you will kill. So he's saying, okay, you're the Jewish people, the ones that kill the prophets, those ones. So okay, I'll give you a bunch of prophets. Go kill them. What are you going to do any different than your ancestors have? They've never followed God. What are you going to do? And it says, so he's like, yeah. Then all the righteous blood from all this, like, if you want to go by the Old Testament law, that's what you're basically saying. You're saying, oh, I read about Abel, poor Abel. Well, you're basically killing Abel. You're killing the Son of Man. You're killing the sinful woman. You're killing everybody, because that's what it was. That's what this milk was. It was infanticide. It was like, oh, this one's gonna go. This is gonna be a rebel child. We'll stone it. You know, this one touched the ark. Kill him. You know, like, so. When it comes to you will not see me again, and so they say, blessed is he who comes to the Lord. The reason you don't understand this is because you're thinking about it in terms of a race of people. That's not what it means. And that would be a really weird thing for Jesus to say. And yeah, it does sound like that because he's using it because they believed in the Mosaic law. They believed in the prophets. So if they wanted to live and die like this, That's what the law does. It just causes death and condemnation. It's the ministry of death. It gives no life. Jesus is the life. Jesus is the life. And people were dying because of this war, and when all they needed was Jesus to be saved. And that was the point of what Jesus was trying to tell them. And they were worried about the temple. Oh, the temple. He talked about the temple. Well, the temple got destroyed. So Jesus was right. You should have just made the temple of bricks, like Peter said. And stop talking about, oh, I'm a child of Abraham. Abraham could be bricks. Oh, tell them not to say Hosanna in the highest. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, with the power of David, mighty king. Tell them not to say that. Well, the bricks would cry out. Wasn't John the Baptist a prophet? So, in conclusion, I would tell you that what Jesus is saying is, you will not see me again, where it says right here. He says, for I say to you, well, he talks about Jerusalem being destroyed and how he wanted to save them. So that's only going to happen in one generation. Jerusalem isn't going to be destroyed every generation. That's a foolish doctrine. Soon isn't going to be true for every generation. It's true for one generation. And soon is one of the most commonly used words in the Bible, especially in the New Testament. For I say to you, you shall see me no more until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. I mean, they were castigating him. I mean, oh, let's get a lawyer. Let's get a lawyer and we'll ask him this really hard question and try to trip him up. Teacher, I didn't say that the son of David on the ninth day would marry his sister. Didn't it? No, he's saying, I'm not going to be sitting here teaching you guys. I'm not going to be... I'm from Galilee. Every time I come around here to the Mount Olives, some people are cool. Other people are really clowning. And they even started to stunt. I'm worried about my life. I'm not coming around here. I'm not teaching up here on Mount Olives anymore. I'm going to Jerusalem. They're gonna kill me there. I'm not gonna die out here. I'm not. I'm done teaching you guys. Here, let me get the amplified version. They put in. It's a hard one because it just says until. So that's how these people run a whole muck. When it says until, is because they think, oh, until, so that means that after something different, and then when they think something different, that can invite any other thing. That's not what it means. Here it does mean until. He's saying until you welcome me like these people welcome me. These people said Hosanna in the name of Jesus. Remember the palm Sunday, the palm leaves, the donkey. Remember that? Until you welcome me like they did, you will not see me until then. Until you can act right. Until you like Steve Gregg said, until you apologize, you cannot come out of your room. But no buts. Until, so he's basically sunning them. He's basically saying, listen, I got the best prophecies, the best miracles. People love me. They think I'm a prophet. And all you people do is try to trip me up. You guys don't even call me like scumbag. You don't even heckle me. Really. You guys just like get like 5 of you together and start whispering and be like, what is that? Thinking you got this. Why don't you save yourself? Because the Messiah wasn't supposed to save himself. Why don't you read your freaking Bible? It says right there. All right. Amplified Bible, Matthew 23:39. And this is a mic drop moment.